Welcome, everyone. So this is Rural Action's grant writing webinar, particularly for farm and food businesses. Some of this likely apply to those who are writing from a non-fit lens, but kind of wanted to put something together in particular for farm and food businesses since that can be a little, those grant opportunities can be a little different. So I know 62 people registered, I think. We'll see how many can actually make it live on a spring evening. So thanks for making time to be here. Um, we'll introduce ourselves here at Rural Action and then welcome you to put introductions in the chat. So I'd love to hear in the chat your name, location, and a sentence about your farm or food business or business dreams if it's not a real thing yet. Welcome new folks. We're putting introductions in the chat. Thanks for joining. And while you're working on that, I'll share that I'm Molly Sowash here at Rural Action and will be leading tonight's presentation. And my trusty sidekick, Lou, is supporting the webinar and keeping an eye on the chat and the tech. So Lou, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lou. Thanks for having me here today. I serve with Rural Action here in Southeast Ohio as a Sustainable Ag AmeriCorps. I'm doing some food access work. Grant writing is really useful to me in the nonprofit world in the future, and so I'm looking forward to being here with you all, and I hope you learn as much as I do today.
Thank you. And then my colleague Katie, who runs our whole farm project. Some of you may know. Katie, want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Molly. So like Molly said, I'm Katie. I also work for Rural Action. I am the whole farm program manager with the Sustainable Ag team. So I do the wraparound support for beginning farmers, helping them access resources. And I also run a winter mentorship program where beginning farmers are paired with mentor farmers. If that sounds interesting to you at all, I will drop my email in the chat so you can reach out to me after this. But very excited for this webinar and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I know there's some former mentees on the call tonight. Good to see you. All right, well, thanks for putting your intros in the chat. I'm gonna share my screen and get started. So welcome to our grant writing webinar here, April 29th. Making time on a busy spring evening. I always appreciate that. So as I mentioned, I'm Molly Sowash, and I direct our Sustainable Agriculture program at Rural Action. And then I also co-own and operate a small farm in Athens County with my husband there and our dogs called Moso Farm. We raise grass-fed beef and pastured pork and sell to direct to consumer mostly and also to a couple wholesale accounts. So I'm coming to this topic tonight both from the lens of working at Rural Action and being responsible for writing and collaborating on maybe 10 to 15 grants a year for our programming, but also from the business lens, having applied for several grants for our farm, and we are an LLC, including one private grant to get silvopasture established on our farm by planting trees, and then a few cost share programs through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which I'll go into in a little more detail here. So I bring the background from Rural Action and from my farm to this. And I also, my undergrad is in English, and I love words. I love editing. You don't have to have a background in writing to write a grant, but that is what I bring and why I like helping other folks with grant writing. I also have a newer found love of spreadsheets since running our farm since 2020 because of how helpful they are in doing math for you as not a good mental mather. So I bring that to the budget end of grant writing as well. So if you're new to Rural Action, we are a nonprofit that serves the Appalachian counties of Ohio primarily. We were formed about 30 years ago, a little over 30 years, and have had a mission to build a just economy. And that's broad because we have a lot of different programming to do so. We're membership based, meaning our members have decision making in our programming. And they identified years ago kind of what the region's assets were that we built programs around. And so our agriculture program is one of those. But we also have a sustainable forestry program, which has a lot of landowner supports and site visits and technical assistance, environmental education for the kiddos, watershed restoration, zero waste, a sustainable energy program, a national service program, like Lou mentioned. They're an AmeriCorps member, and they make up a large part of our support for the work. And then several social enterprises. And so our agriculture program has 5 sort of core areas of programming. One is food hub development with a history of supporting and growing, in particular, a food hub called the Chester Hill Produce Auction. Also do direct farmer support, and that's what Katie shared about our whole farm project in terms of, educational webinars like this, on-farm workshops, site visits, high school interns, apprentices, and the beginning farmer mentorship program. Probably missing some things in there, but that's a big part of the work. Farm to institution, we work with healthcare providers to provide fresh produce to patients, and we also work with schools to process and deliver local food to try and get into their menus and cafeterias. And then local food access, which crosses over a lot with the farm to institution work, but looks like market-based food access, so paying the farmer a fair price for the best, healthiest local food and distributing those through the Southeast Ohio Food Bank and their member pantries, as well as other feeding programs. And then lastly, the Appalachian Staple Foods Collaborative, which understands that a local food system needs to include good staple grains, nuts, beans to make up a full human diet, and so building up the region's staple foods. So that's just a bit of background about our work. We would love to connect with you more if any of these program areas sound interesting to you. But I want to get into what we'll talk about for the rest of the night. So I'm going to overview kind of the grant landscape in terms of what types of funding exists, why do grants exist, and how does that shape how we write them, dispel a couple myths, and then talk about seeking and choosing grants. I saw in some of your registrations you were particularly interested in how do you find grants. And then steps to apply. We'll go through how to be prepared, form a budget, write a narrative, and some kind of example narratives. I've got a couple of examples of Ohio farmers who've secured various different kinds of grants. And then we'll end with some resources and hopefully a good, robust discussion. So I do have these slides prepared for the first probably hour, but then would really love to hear from the group. I know we have some grant writers in the mix. Would love to hear your wisdom. And so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as they come to you. If I or Lou sees that it's a really burning question that could be addressed in the moment, I'm happy to, but otherwise we can hold them to the end. Okay, so what types of funding exist? And this is particularly around grants and cost shares, right? So I'm not going into loans as a funding opportunity, though that is definitely an important topic for businesses. So types of grant funding, there are federal grants. These are typically a larger amount. You'd be hard pressed to find a small, like $5,000 federal grant. These are typically bigger and therefore more rigorous in terms of the application, the reporting requirements, the documentation. Typically, these are reimbursement grants, though sometimes you might see that there's exceptions to get advanced payments. And they typically are a little less flexible on rules and requirements, right? It's the federal government. They have to have a lot of transparency in where their funds are going and that it's well documented. So there's something called the Federal Code of Regulations, which grant awardees typically have to follow as far as how they use and track the equipment they purchase, how they seek quotes for the things you're purchasing from a grant, things like that. There are state grants. In Ohio, I think they're a little less common. I'm not sure about other states. Typically, what I have seen is these are federal funds that are administered by the state. So sometimes we call that like pass-through funding that is being managed by perhaps Ohio department, but originally sourced from the federal government. And then there are private grants, and these are typically a smaller amount, though everything I'm saying here, there are probably exceptions to these rules. These are just generalizations. They're often simpler applications with a quicker turnaround time and less rigorous requirements. Typically, they're for very specific things. A family foundation that, wants to see more farms become animal welfare certified, for example, or wants more farms adopting agroforestry practices specifically. And then there are cost share programs, which are not traditional grants. The cost share programs I'm most familiar with are through NRCS, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. This is a federal agency with offices in most counties, and they work with you to identify practices that you are going to agree to adopt on your farm, typically around conservation, because it was developed after the Dust Bowl to conserve our soils. There's a whole slate of practices under their cost share programs that you can work with your NRCS agent on. And they put that all together in a package and they apply to the funding source. So it's not it's a lot more collaborative with that office, but I wanted to mention it because it is a great source of funds for infrastructure and practices that you might want to be adding to your business. So a couple examples are federal grants. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but the Business Builder Subawards. So the Appalachia Regional Food Business Center is part of what is supporting tonight's webinar. I should have mentioned that earlier. So that is a USDA program that Rural Action and 16 other organizations collaborate on. And as part of that have business builder grants that applicants can apply to from across the country. There are centers for every state, but here we fall under the Appalachia Regional Food Business Center. SARE is a great federal program. They have farmer rancher grants for research and education, and there's the value added producer grant. As far as state grants, some of you may have been familiar with the Regional Food Systems Infrastructure Grant that went out. And then there's the Specialty Crop Block Grant, which I believe co-ops and agricultural associations can apply to, not individual businesses. A couple private grants, examples are the Fund a Farmer grant through FACT, which is the Food Animal Concerns Trust. American Farmland Trust has a couple private grants. And Ohio State University has a Warner grant for sustainable agriculture research. And then the cost share programs I mentioned through Natural Resource Conservation Service. There's a lot of programs that fall under them and a lot of abbreviations and jargon. So I mentioned a couple. The most popular, I would say, are EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and then CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. So I'm curious. I'm going to see if I can launch this poll and see who in the room has written, whether or not you were awarded one of these, who has written a federal, state, or private grant. See if you can see the poll and give it like 30 seconds for you to fill it out. I suppose I should have had a none of the above option, and that's okay if that's you. See, folks are entering their answers. Give it 10 more seconds. Thanks for doing that. So 10 of you responded. It looks like 7 of you have written private grants, 4 have written federal grants, 3 state grants, and 3 cost share programs. Oh, just went up. So great. That makes sense that there's a little bit more experience with private grants. They're a little bit more accessible, and but glad to see some experience with federal, state, and cost share programs too. Okay, I'm going to end that. I will share the results here for a minute. Okay. If you've never written one, then you're in the right place. All right. Okay, so why do grants exist? I would love for you to put in the chat why you think grants exist, or in your experience, what you've seen. Della, to get our taxes back. Yes, love it. Encourage business to grow. Thanks, Wendy. Any other ideas? Okay, so this is a broad question and every grant is different, but every grant that I have seen exists to solve a problem. And our job as grant writers is to figure out what problem the funder wants to solve and how our business or our project is going to help them solve it. So I think of these problems in 3 categories: environmental problems, economic problems, and social problems. And these are examples of grants that I know are real that I've looked into. So there are environmental grants that want you to plant trees to improve animal welfare, like I mentioned, to research sustainable farming practices and share it out with other farmers, to help farmers become more resilient after natural disasters. So those are kind of environmental grants. There are economic problems. So the Business Builder Subaward, that grant wants to strengthen the regional food supply chain and grow out the mid-tier businesses, processors, marketers, distributors, etc. Some want to see Appalachia transition justly from a coal-based economy to a more regenerative economy. Some want to see you create jobs. And then there are social problems. A funder may want to increase the number of woman-owned businesses, support veterans in entering farming, or increase food access. So instead of thinking of a grant as a Christmas present to do whatever you want with, it can do a lot, but think of how it's an investment the funder's making in you to help them solve a bigger environmental or societal issue. Okay, a couple myths. We get a lot of questions at Rural Action about what grants are out there. And so we hear some things such as, grants are free money that I can use however I want. I wish this was the case, but grants are for specific, usually restricted uses. It ranges across the board. Every grant is different. But there are strings attached because they're, the funder is giving money in exchange for you to deliver on completing a project, reaching certain outcomes you've promised, or adopting practices. And so in the grant world, we usually call these deliverables. In exchange for the grant, I will deliver on my promises. And so there's work required to apply, do the project, and then document and report it and track it accurately. Grant income is also taxed in this country. Another myth is that there are grants to help me start my farm from scratch. Now, there may be some, but by and large, what I have seen is that you typically have to show a proof of concept before applying, that you have some years under your belt as a business owner, that you are worth the investment. So from the funder perspective, 50% of all small businesses survive. So they're taking a gamble on a startup business. And so this is why they usually require that you have some experience under your belt. But there could be some exceptions to this. This is just general. And then the third one is that there are grants to help me buy land. In my 6 years at Rural Action, I've never seen this. Given the complexity of a funder owning that land, the potential inequities of deciding who gets that funding. But there are loans, and there are specific agricultural loans that can be very helpful. All right, so how do you find grants? There's no secret place, but I usually find them through newsletters. I've linked a couple here, and I have a grant writing checklist that I've sent out to you all. And if you signed up just in the last day, I'll send it to you after this webinar with links to various newsletters like the Whole Farm Post that Katie sends out from Rural Action every other week, more national newsletters like the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, SARE, et cetera, et cetera. So sign up for these, get connected with agricultural organizations. Usually there are announcements put out about upcoming deadlines. And then my colleague Hans put together a sort of database when he sees grants and what priorities they have, and he put that on our website, which I'll show you. He keeps this as updated as he can. And so, bookmark this tab and reference it. It has grant writing assistance companies, what grants are available for-profit businesses, and then generally kind of about the funding, when it closes, how much money it's for. And the most important thing is the link to the webpage with the most updated information. So this is a resource to check out what grants exist. So once you've found a grant, maybe you see something on Rural Action's webpage, you have to figure out, is this grant for me? And be okay if the answer might be no in some cases. I asked all my colleagues at Rural Action, many of them, when I was putting this webinar together, like, what is one top piece of advice you'd give to farmers or food business owners writing grants? Most of them said, start with your project and find the funding that fits it, not the other way around. So make sure that you're not bending your business or bending your project to appease a funder, and it's not something that you would do otherwise or authentic to you as a business owner. There are certainly language you can use or ways to write a grant that you think might appeal to the funder, but make sure that the core project you're pitching is something you want to be doing. And then take time to research the grant. This is huge. You'll save yourself a lot of time by reading over the materials. Often for those bigger grants, there are grant webinars that answer a lot of questions live. Really understand what the grant program is before you're applying. You may discover in the first paragraph that you're ineligible, or you might discover that you are exactly what they're looking for, and a lot of what you're already planning is a big part of their grant funding goals. So then ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? Some grants are much more rigorous than others. Some can be really great, and others might be kind of pushing your business to do something that actually isn't even financially viable in the long run. So you have to kind of try to figure that out. I know it's hard to figure that out before you write the thing, but it's a good question to ask. And a resource you have is Rural Action and other organizations or other farms that have written that grant before that you can ask. So just a couple examples. Grants come in all shapes and sizes. I'm going to tell you about two grants that are polar opposites. One is the Value Added Producer Grant. So this is federal funding. It's around $50,000 to $250,000. So a lot of money. It takes around 60 to 100 hours to apply. Some people say give yourself around 1 to 2 months to put everything together. You submit it through government grant portal. The budget requires one-to-one matching funds. And so we often refer to this as match. So if your project, the project is going to cost you $100,000 to pull off, you can ask the USDA for 50,000 and you have to bring 50,000. So that can be a challenge sometimes. That could be your own business capital that you've set aside for the project. It can also be the materials that you are giving to the project, which is considered like an in-kind match or in-kind donation. Or sometimes volunteer time can be used as in-kind match, but that can be a hurdle for folks. It requires business paperwork, your Schedule F, your operating agreement, certificate of good standing, resumes, and then the application is robust. You have to show that you've done market research, have a sales analysis, multiple letters of support for the project. So this application could be 100 pages or more. And you hear back within 5 to 7 months. This is the sort of like biggest, most rigorous kind of grant that I have seen for farmer food business owners. On the totally flip side, there is a small self-care for farmers grant that our farmer friend Lindsay sent, and it's for $100. Probably takes 15 minutes to apply through a Google form. Requires no business paperwork, and you hear back within a couple months, and you use it for giving yourself not giving, but going to get a massage, going to a yoga class. It's kind of like a nice self-care thing. So this is what I mean by, is the juice worth the squeeze? And there's a lot of grants that fall between these two. Okay, so you've decided, you found the grant, you decided the juice is worth the squeeze, and then now you got to apply. So the steps I think about are to prepare. You can always be doing this. When you find the grant, though, we'll go through this in a more detailed slide, but reviewing the information, keeping your business plan updated, being ready. I like to form a budget next, put together a budget spreadsheet that has the items that are connected to my project that I've probably thought about in my mind, and then write a narrative. Some people like to write a narrative and then a budget or go back and forth. It's not strict science here, but it can be helpful to know, what exactly are you asking the funder to fund, what items are in your budget, and now build your narrative around. Because sometimes what can happen is you write about a project and then put a budget together and some items just don't seem to fit, or you didn't really elaborate about those items in the narrative, and reviewers get confused. And then finally apply, put all your materials together through whatever application portal, whether it's online or a Google form, or you email it in, or back in the day, I heard you had to mail it in and get the postage stamp at the right hour. But for now, it's these days, it's typically digital. So I'm going to go into each step. So prepare. I've emphasized reviewing grant information, just a couple terms if you're not familiar with them. Usually for the bigger grants, you'll find a request for proposals or a request for applications, sometimes referred to as an RFP or an RFA. This is your go-to document to answer any of your questions. A website is usually just a primer to the grant. If there's a request for proposals, that's going to have all the requirements, all of the eligibility, everything that's allowed to be in a budget, etc. Make a grant folder. So I like to make a place where I can put all of the information for that one grant. Even if it's an online portal where I'm supposed to be typing in my answers to all of the application questions, I suggest you copy and paste every question into your own document so that you can keep tweaking it and edit it before you paste it into the portal. So reach out to former awardees. This is something, like, give yourself time to do this. You may not always have time to do this, but you can certainly reach out to, oftentimes a grant will publish who the awardees were from the last year. The SARE grant that I mentioned earlier is one of my favorites, and they have a whole database of every grant ever published since, I mean, at least the 90s, maybe 80s, as far back as I've gone. But you can filter it by your state, by the farmer and rancher grant versus the research grant, and even look up keywords. If you want to look into tomatoes or something, you can just look up tomato and see what projects have been done and reach out to them. A lot of, they'll give you the real talk of, like, was it worth it, or what were the tricks to applying, or maybe even send you their application to. And then keep your business plan updated. Easier said than done, but if you have your basic boilerplate language, you can copy and paste. You can plagiarize yourself all day. So you can copy and paste that information when you're writing a new grant. They're all going to ask, describe your business, um, share background on your business and where it's located. So just have that language ready and share qualifications about you as a business owner or the qualifications of your team. So if you have that prepared, you'll make writing it a lot easier. And you're going to form a budget. So I also sent out yesterday a budget spreadsheet template. You're welcome to use this. It just has standard categories for writing a budget, and I'll go into it. The caveat is if the grant funder says you need to fill out our budget template, definitely defer to what they want you to fill out. But if they don't, you can use this and put it together. So this generally has the core categories of personnel. So you might be asking for time for your farm manager. You can add a year. If it's not a 2-year grant, you could add one. Or if it's a 1-year grant, you could delete a column. You put in your total request, and then you usually need to show a budget justification or a narrative explanation. Both mean the same thing, which is to say, how did you come up with that math? So you need $15,000. Why? Well, the math is Jane Doe, my farm manager, makes $15 an hour, and I'm budgeting this grant to pay for 20 hours a week for 52 weeks. That's how I got there. Fringe is a word that means like the benefits of an employee. For smaller businesses, this is probably not going to apply. But at somewhere like Rural Action, our employees have, health insurance and retirement, and so we put in a percentage to cover that. Travel. Let's say you're writing a grant for professional development and you're going to go to an annual farm conference, or you're going to present on your findings for a research project. You can yourself for mileage potentially through that grant. You're asking for $70 to go to this conference because it's 100 miles round trip, and the federal mileage reimbursement rate is 70 cents a mile. So for every single item, it's good to show as much justification of the cost as you can. Sometimes it might be based on a quote from a company, or both, based on 3 quotes, averaging them. Or you need to rent a processing space and the exact rental fee. And then it'll total, and this is what you can submit. If it requires match, sometimes you have to show, you can add a column that shows this is the amount I'm requesting from you, the grant. This is the amount that I'm bringing to the project. And then double check, make sure so that your, project doesn't get caught up in the review stage with red flags. Like, do all of your budget items relate to your project? Are they allowable by the funder? Again, is the match there that's required if it is? And then can your budget items be documented for reimbursement? It might be tempting to put in there a whole lot, but if you get the grant, and typically they're reimbursement based, you're going to have to show good documentation in order to say, I did incur this cost. Here's my receipt for my vacuum sealer. And then they'll reimburse you. For supplies like that, it's obvious. You paid for the thing, you send in the receipt, and they reimburse you. But some grants, for example, might allow for employee time, and that can be tricky. It's exciting to think about. You can pay for employee time, but you have to ask yourself, are you able to document payroll in an official way? And so do you have proper employees? Are you paying payroll taxes? Is that something you want to be doing under this grant? Or are you hiring independent contractors? So think that through so you don't get yourself in a situation where it's going to be hard to actually kind of document those costs for reimbursement. Okay. And then writing a narrative. So I like to create a document where I paste all of the questions. And, every grant is going to have its own set of questions. Typically, though, you're going to want to show how your project meets the funder's priorities. So try and figure out like what do they want and how do you answer that for them? Again, how do you solve that problem? Also, there's usually outcomes or metrics that you will agree to report on after your project. And so be specific with this. I'll share examples in a minute, but instead of saying, this is going to increase my business sales, probably that's true for all the applicants. More specifically, though, this is going to increase my business's sales by $20,000 annually. That is a specific outcome that you can track and actually see how you did once you do the project. Give a complete picture of your business. What is your operation? What are your goals and mission? What's the qualifications of your team? Sometimes I've seen people writing a grant and, maybe they have 1,000 words to expound on their business and they use 75 words. The reviewer knows nothing, doesn't know anything about you. And so make sure that you're giving a complete picture and using the space that you have, not to be repetitive, but to expand on, the ins and outs of your business. This is a small thing, but I think it's more compelling when grants are written in future tense. Assume that like they're going to fund you. It's a really good project, and say this project will happen. So instead of saying like, I'd really like the funding, it would help us grow, say this project will enable our farm to grow produce year round. It will increase access to locally grown healthy food. I think it just makes a more kind of confident narrative. Okay, so you've written the thing, double check that you've answered all the questions. Oh, I just said this, but use the space to elaborate. It's like a school assignment. Like, did you answer every aspect of the question? Make sure you review that. And then if you have time, share the draft narrative with others for feedback. Sometimes you can be so in the thick of each word that it's hard to dial back and read it with fresh eyes. So send it to a peer or a friend or someone here at Rural Action or at AceNet to read it top to bottom and give you feedback. Okay, and then you apply. So all of this is done in a document somewhere and you've got it refined, and now you literally copy it into whatever portal you're required to submit it. Submit early. I say this with humility because I've been there copying and pasting my answers in an hour before it's due, but just give yourself at least a day. Wi-Fi issues come up, portals crash, avoid the panic, try and get it in. Okay, so a few things just about writing. People ask, what does it take to be a good grant writer? Really, it's just about being a good writer. And so I want to share a couple of my favorite writing quotes with you and how they can inform how we write a grant. So the first is by James Joyce. He said, "In the particular is contained the universal." In the particular is contained the universal. This translates to mean be specific. I see sometimes more vague outcomes listed. Be as specific as you can to really give reviewers an idea of what particular impacts their funding is going to have on you and your community. Another favorite quote is, "If I had had more time, I would have written a shorter letter." There's debate about who said this, but some say Mark Twain said it, which is to say, give yourself time to edit. If you had had more time, you would have written less. Be concise. And so go through, yes, fill out the space you have to elaborate on your business, but usually saying it in more clear, concise terms is going to be easier for the reviewers. You don't want to exhaust them with fluff words. And then Anton Chekhov said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass." This is often brought up in like the poetry world, but I do think it has application for grants, which is to say, show, don't tell. So give an example. You might want to say, "My fresh produce increases the health of my customers. That's great. You're telling us that it increases the health of your customers. But if you instead said that there's an individual who picks up their CSA every week from you who said it's helped them manage their diabetes, now you're like showing me and providing kind of color and story behind that. Or data. You could say, in my customer survey, 60% of my customers say they're motivated to buy my products for health reasons. Okay. See what time it is. Okay, I will go through some examples, and then if folks need a break, we can take a couple-minute break, and then we'll do some resources. So I took some examples of real applications. I changed quite a bit of the language and the farm names, so they're de-identified. But a lot of grants are going to ask, describe your business. So which sounds better to you? The first farm is Bubbling Brook Farm. Bubbling Brook Farm in Franklin, Ohio, has been a foundational farm in the community for generations. The farm is owned and operated by Sarah Jones, a passionate farmer committed to carrying on this valuable business. Sarah is developing the farm in authentic ways to modernize systems, diversify income streams, and enhance the business's marketing methodologies. So that's Bubbling Brook. The second farm is Sunlit Acres. Sunlit Acres is a woman-owned farm started in 2020 with 2 acres currently under cultivation. Sunlit Acres serves northeastern Ohio by growing heirloom, chemical-free fruits and vegetables with a focus on sustainability and good stewardship. We sell our produce at our local farmers market, through our online store, and to several wholesale accounts, including a health food store and 2 restaurants. Put in the chat which you think sound better. Della likes the we in 2. Beverly likes 2. Sweet. Okay. Yeah. Seems like most of you like number 2. And as Kelly said, it has more specificity. I actually know what this farm grows, where they sell it, where they're located, kind of like some of their mission. Many grants are going to ask for your project outcomes. So you might say it's going to expand your market reach. You're going to do some trainings in farm marketing and customer engagement, which will boost the business's viability, increase sales, open new revenue streams. All sounds really great, but what specifically can you say you're going to track? Actually, this project's going to increase website visits by 25% and result in 10% more monthly orders as tracked by our order management system. Great. Now I have a concrete. It's going to lead to our business selling to 1 additional wholesale market as a result of the marketing campaign to restaurants. Be specific. This is more of an environmental grant. This project will improve bird habitat. Share a little bit more about how. For example, this will improve bird habitat by establishing silvopasture on 10 acres, which will increase the availability of open woodland ecosystems. Or it's going to increase the number of songbirds, and I'm going to track this and document it through a battery-operated recording device, which is a real thing, by the way. If anyone wants to do a project like that, I would love to talk to you. This project will improve our farm's ability to process produce. This is true, but very general. So instead saying it will increase our sales of value-added products by $10,000, or it will divert 1,000 pounds of food waste from the landfill by processing it. So your funder might be interested in food waste and reducing it, and you might share that second bullet point. Or they're more of a business-oriented funder and you're sharing the first one, or most likely just share both. Project background. Oh, this is about cutting your words. So these 2 sentences say the exact same thing, but one is more concise. So due to a long history of resource extraction and boom and bust industries in the region, southeastern Ohio has a high rate of poverty and a limitation of markets for local goods due to industry leaving the area. Deep breath. Same sentence, but cut down is due to our history of resource extraction, southeastern Ohio experiences high poverty rates and limited local markets. This is where, if you had more time, you would have written less. And then lastly, I know someone in their registration asked about project timelines and work plans. So again, being specific and showing that you've really thought through your work plan will be more convincing to reviewers, but also help you out if you get the grant. And usually you might hear back 6 to 12 months later and say, like, what the heck am I supposed to do for this grant? So I asked this farmer if I could use her language pretty verbatim. This one is a little dumbed down. You could just say, the first phase is going to be interviews with current market participants and community members. And then the second is visiting co-ops. Then we're going to have these meetings with producers. But if I was a reviewer, I would want to know a lot more. So this is the same information elaborated upon. From February to September, we're going to do interviews. We'll develop a questionnaire, interview 10 producers. There's a goal to this activity, which is to determine what challenges and shortfalls are experienced by producers around here. This grant was all about developing cooperative marketing between farms. And then, as you see, every phase has a date included, some kind of metric they're going to meet, and a goal. Okay, so some examples. Abby Turner is a wonderful partner of Rural Actions. She's run a couple businesses, Mushroom Harvest Provisions and Lucky Penny Farm. And all these folks I'm about to share are happy to have you reach out to them and talk to them about their experience as farmers writing these grants. She's had 2 value-added producer grants. She's my go-to for asking questions about that grant opportunity. One was to study the feasibility of making caramel sauce out of her goat dairy operation. The other was value-adding shiitake mushrooms. She's also had a SARE grant, which was about determining the feasibility of the production of sheep milk and how to process it into artisan cheeses. Lindsay Klonig, she has had the cost share program called Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which installed a water treatment system, perimeter fencing, paddock fencing, a high tunnel. Another similar cost share program is called Conservation Stewardship Program, and she had that for producing food perennials, pollinator habitat, and reseeding her pastures with clover. Oops. And then she's currently working on this Warner grant with OSU to study onion varieties that are well adapted to southeastern Ohio's unique climate and soils. Charlie Esselgroth, he has a dairy farm in southwestern Ohio, and he has gotten this private catalyzing agroforestry grant to establish silvopasture on his organic dairy farm. And then I found way back in the database of SARE that he had gotten in the 90s a SARE farmer and rancher grant to identify corn varieties that do well in organic systems. Crystal raises sheep and poultry in Lawrence County. She's received a Fund a Farmer grant from FACT, which was about getting water to sheep on rotating pastures. And then a Livestock Conservancy micro grant to purchase the handling system for her sheep. And lastly, the Couples are in Meigs County. They run Grass Hills Farm, which is mostly a dairy, but they got a Brighter Future Fund grant from American Farmland Trust to get their pasture broiler chicken enterprise going, which paid for chicken tractor supplies, a brooder, coolers, and upright freezer. So just to say, like, you can do this too. And these are people to reach out to and learn about these particular funding opportunities. Okay, it's 7:20. I'll probably wrap up here in 10 minutes, so welcome any questions that are bubbling up. I do want to just step back and acknowledge the times we're in. Now is a time when funding for small businesses or sustainable farms is being threatened. We're still, the Appalachia Regional Food Business Center, which is bringing to you this webinar, is still experiencing our funds being frozen. And so it's a little bit of an awkward time to talk about grant writing, but I do know that there are grant opportunities and believe that there will continue to be them, and that these skills are important to develop because sometimes you hear about an opportunity with short notice. So being ready to apply, having some language prepared, having some kind of like projects or needs in your mind is important. And as we know, particularly the federal funding picture waxes and wanes with every administration and like agricultural trends over time. And so being ready for those opportunities is the key, whether they're, more of them now or later. So there's just a couple. I wanted to leave you with some that are coming up so that you had some tangible things to look into. I took these from the database on our website. The Ohio Farm Bureau has a grant coming up that's due July 31st. It is, contrary to what I said at the beginning, this one is particularly around startup funds. So it's a rare opportunity for young professionals who are looking to start their business or enhance their existing business. I saw that it has to be for businesses that are between 0 and 5 years. And you do have to be an Ohio Farm Bureau member. So again, that's where you scan for the eligibility, but there's still time to become a member in July. The Amplifier grant is an interesting one. It's not specific to agriculture. It's takes rolling applications. It's small, probably under $5,000 amounts. And they say, if you're working on efforts to make the world a better place, we want you to apply. It's broad on purpose. You can be a nonprofit, a business, a school. Pitch your project. I've been mentioning SARE for a while, so the Farmer and Rancher Grant, which is probably most applicable to those on the call. Typically, there's no open call right now, but typically those grants are due sometime in early December, and you can sign up for their newsletter. It's a good next step. And this is around like on-farm research or demonstration projects. The whole goal of SARE is to advance the field of sustainable farming through farmers teaching other farmers what they're learning. And then I saw the Farmer Veteran Fellowship for any veterans on the call is due in January to provide direct assistance to veterans in their beginning years of farming or ranching. So a few you can look into if those apply to you. Resources moving forward. So I've mentioned Rural Action is available, as well as AceNet. I know Kelly's from AceNet on the call. I don't see all the participants, but there may be others too. And we partner with a lot of other organizations across Appalachian region through the Regional Food Business Center. And for those in the Northeast part of Ohio, OSU has a Ag Innovation Center, the Northeast Ohio Ag Innovation Center, which they're really wonderful and helpful. So reach out to them. I am not including everything here. So definitely, if you have other things to contribute or other organizations that are helpful, throw them. Della, does the Veteran Beginning Farmer Grant use the same 10 years as the USDA? I don't know. I'd have to look into that. Okay. Grant writing consultants. So you can, sometimes you have to pay or sometimes they're free. There are like companies out there that do the grant writing for you. Stewards Unlimited, I met with them a couple months ago and I really like their work. I believe instead of charging you up front, they'd take a percentage of your grant funding if you get it, but I could be wrong. So just look into these things. But they've got a really nice newsletter. You can check boxes for what kinds of grant alerts you want to receive. Like, I'm a business or I'm a nonprofit and I want to see grants that are about livestock or produce, and they'll send you when grant deadlines are coming. The Michael Fields Grants Advising is a free service for Midwestern agricultural entrepreneurs. There's Good Agriculture, which helps handle the grant writing and process. And then the Richard A. Barber Company, which I thought it was interesting. They help you prepare and write the grant, and they also help with, if you get the grant, some of the administration tasks. I sent out this checklist, but I'll send it again. It's pretty much tonight's slideshow in a more digestible form. So if it's helpful to you as you're looking at a grant, you can use that. And the budget template. And then you can reach out to us. This is some of us staff at Rural Action, those of us in particular who work most directly with farmer or food business owners. So happy to happy to look at what you're working on, whether it's related to our program or not. All right, thanks for joining. I'm eager to see what questions are coming up and to have a discussion. So I'll pass it to Lou if you have any questions you've seen in the chat that we could start with.
Yeah, of course. Thank you everyone for being here. What a great presentation from Molly. We have some questions in the chat. You got Della's question about the veteran beginner farm grant. That's what I thought. Jean is asking, how can an organization be a member of Rural Action?
Well, thanks for that question. Members are those who volunteer with us or contribute $20 minimum a year to kind of invest in the work. And then they're invited out to all kinds of our events, as well as our annual meeting where members vote on decisions and board members and things like that. So you can email me to become a member, and I'll share that out also with everybody in the email follow-up. Thanks for that.
Thank you for that question. Nate B is also asking, do you encourage the use of AI tools in grant writing?
I admittedly don't have a lot of experience with using AI to write, but I have heard multiple people say they like it as a way to not be staring at a blank page anymore and to have something written down that you might end up really heavily changing and editing, but it just gets you started. So everyone feels differently about AI. That's a personal decision. If it saves you time and helps you get your thoughts rolling, go try it. Does anyone else on this call have experience using AI to help with grant writing? Feel free to come off mute if you do.
Have recently just dabbled, and I'm scared of it for a few reasons. I saw the Terminator in the theater, 30 years ago, and I'm still haunted. Also, I guess they are stinking up Memphis with the AI data something putting off gas. I don't know, man. I'm a little skeptical. Okay. But I have seen the results of other people using it recently. And what I'll tell you, I have seen one of its strengths is getting you a sort of general overview nicely formatted. So if you really just hate making bullet points and kind of organizing a format for a document, and you have to use a PDF instead of a portal where you're just copy and paste a text box, and you have to come up with your own formatting. I think it's really, really been valuable for that from my experience, but I'm at the point where I'm using all boilerplate. I don't have to write a lot of new content. I'm trying to fund the same things over and over. But yeah, that's where I found it useful. And definitely if you've got a writer's block situation, it can help get you jump start.
Thanks, Della. Della does a lot of grant writing for Appalachian Sustainable Development, so she's another resource to reach out to. I'm just going to volunteer you, Della.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do a lot of intern onboarding for folks who want to learn to do it, and will do it to help me in exchange for learning what I know. And it's fun. I just want to commend you, Molly, for a brilliant webinar, and this was great. Your slideshow is so much prettier than mine. That's where I think I don't have much strength, is on that sort of graphic design setup.
The nice thing is grants don't have to look flashy, so
no, they don't. That's why I think I'm good at it, because I'm not good at flashy.
Can you apply for multiple grants at once?
If they're different grants, you can apply for as many as you want, given your own time and sanity. If you are applying to the same grant opportunity or the same funder, there will likely be guidelines or rules about that on the grant webpage or request for application. So, an example might be like the farmers market promotion program we just said. You can only put in one application for that same program. But could you also be applying to another completely separate USDA grant? Yeah. Or a separate private grant? Absolutely. You can. And you can. Oh, so, okay. So yes, you can. There is one consideration for federal funding. It's probably a little bit more applicable to like bigger organizations that are balancing big grants, but if you are getting federal funds for a certain project, you usually can't also get different programs federal funds to fund the same exact thing. So the feds just don't want you to double dip. And so you have to be clear about this grant is for running a beginning farmer program. This grant is doing something different and they're not doing the same. If you have private funding that's helping support the same thing, that's okay. It's just like the federal government doesn't want the same thing funded twice, if that makes sense. Does that help? Did that just confuse everyone? Okay, makes sense. What other questions are coming up?
Sometimes, listen, if you've got a big project and your federal grant is only covering part of it and you want federal grants to cover the other part of it, that's not doing the same thing. You're filling in the blank missing pieces of the project. So as long as you're not like, so this part of the funding is going to cover the sort of the staff and administration and supplies, and this other part of money is going to go to travel and maybe paying some workforce development participants or something like that, right? So if you can separate it out and clearly say, this money would not supplant any other funding, then they know you're not double dipping. You can articulate that in the application, so you can still apply for multiple federal funds on a larger project as long as you're clearly differentiating where those funds go and they're not, you're not paying yourself twice or whatever.
Good question. Thanks, Stella. Yeah, the puzzle pieces have to fit together and not overlap each other. And I'm glad you brought up NRCS because it is a different process for going about the grant writing where you're working more closely with an NRCS agent. But it can be so valuable. In fact, our farm just put in a water system with frost-free waters and fencing and a feed pad just last fall with Equip. So good luck on that project. Just to speak on that point of like, funding for a tractor or seeds or some of these things, generally what I see is those sort of operational production expenses are hard. It's hard to come by grant funding for those types of things. An example might be if it's tied to a project, like let's say you're doing research on tomato varieties, including the seeds, the irrigation for that probably would be acceptable in a budget. But if it's not about that research about those tomatoes and you throw in irrigation system that you just kind of need for your business, it's most likely gonna not fly. And so it can be, you're right, those production related or sort of operational expenses are harder to find funding for outside of funding. Yeah, so Kelly has a good question about those on the call. Which components? Well, Kelly, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, this is something I'm curious about. I feel like Molly, what an excellent job covering all the components of what grant funding can be like. And I know we're just like a certain subset of interested folks, but I was just wondering amongst those of us here, if anyone felt comfortable sharing like what they feel like is really aligned and they feel comfortable with, or what parts they would especially feel like getting help from resources like what Rural Action can provide, or other kind of agencies listed in what you shared, Molly, could be helpful, like topically.
Yeah, so like what is more challenging for folks? Is it finding grants? Is it figuring out if you're eligible, writing it? Is it the budgeting part? Something else?
And if
Thoughts from
there's no answers yet at this time, that's fine too. This is a little bit where my curiosity lies today.
Yeah, would love to hear from the group what y'all are thinking.
I have math problems, and I don't mean like calculations. I mean, I have beef with math. Okay. So I have a finance team. I turn everything over to them. I mean, I can generalize, and honestly, in a pinch, I'm actually better at math than I think I am because I failed so many times in school and had to keep repeating it. So some of it stuck somehow, but I know just enough to be dangerous and always have to get somebody who's better at math. I'm more a word person. I feel like you're either math or words, and I'm not math at all. And so getting help is critical. I have to have somebody check my numbers every time. And it's just as important as having like a final editor that doesn't, has fresh eyes, and that's true for the content and the narrative and for the budget sheets. It's definitely a problem for me. I've had to learn a lot about spreadsheets, and that helps. But if you have a person who's like your QuickBooks person on your team, use them for the budgets.
And it looks like Nate had a nice comment in the chat. Grant writing can seem a little bit intimidating. I think we could all agree with that, all on the same page. Hopefully, this presentation has helped ease that a little bit.
It's helpful to hear your, success in getting private donations, for like a mission-based organization or even a business. Like that can be another route of going directly to like private philanthropy, which is a different kind of approach or set of skills to schmooze than necessarily writing a grant. So maybe Nate can lead the next webinar on that. But thanks for sharing. Since we have time and I just learned how to do polls on Zoom, I'm going to launch a poll with Kelly's questions or question and see what you guys check. For those of you who are wanting to add something. And then while you're doing that, Crystal, finding grants, prioritizing projects that correlate with the available grants can be challenging when you have a big vision and so many priorities. Yeah. Yeah. Finding the right fit, like is tough. The grant might be looking for you to do something. How do you figure out which project fits best with that?
Okay, look, I hate to keep jumping in here, but I do have a hack for this one. Sometimes you want to think thematically, right? So we needed lots of random stuff, right? We're trying to put in some like a riparian buffer in a planned wetland. We needed some irrigation hoses. We needed to get the water turned on our new site. So our theme is water, and we applied for a grant on the theme of water, and we were able to get irrigation supplies, some planned wetlands. We were able to get grid water connected for when the rainwater collection isn't enough, and it sort of made it more a bigger picture concept of all the water things, right? So if you can take your project and piece it together under different themes, where it may be an implementation project, or it may be a planning project, or it may be like focused on a specific kind of you need propagation is your theme, and so you're going to get the plant starts, and you're going to get seeds, and you're going to get plant starter dirt, what's that stuff called, seed starter mix, or you're going to get some little pots, or maybe you want a soil blocker and sifter, and all the supplies that would be related to propagating new plants, right? So try and think, either broaden your theme or narrow your theme to be able to pick what out of all of your many projects this funder is going to like best, right? And it has worked for me many times.
Find the theme and lump all the things that fit under that theme. Yeah. Great advice. So I'm ending the poll, and it looks like finding grant opportunities is the biggest thing, but also writing narratives, a couple on the budget, and other challenges. Well, I want to share my screen real quick here. I mentioned this group, Stewards Unlimited, but I really have found their staff and services to be helpful. So here's their website. The reason I like them is because they're all about agricultural organizations. So they understand the field, which can be hard to find. Ag is so specialized sometimes. But then there's this hand-picked grants in your inbox. And I signed up for this. Searching for grants is the last thing you want to do. Let us help you find them. And you fill out, I think it's just a Google form they've linked. You can describe your entity, for-profit, nonprofit, a cooperative, or a government entity. Well, here, let's just do it so you can see. I'll do it for my phone. For-profit, and we're gonna do Ohio. And then you select what topics, best suit your needs. So you might want to if you want to see all the grants, you can select everything, but you're gonna have to weed out a lot. But for example, I'm not a dairy farm. Those grants aren't gonna apply to me. We're a rancher. I guess I'll say we're not a meat processor, but we do sell we sell processed meats. So I'll just click that. We do some workshops, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then you can also say whether, you want to be seeing grants that are about education, food access. If you're specifically, an educator, I'll just say those ones. And then even more drilled down, I guess, there are some grants that really are specific to organic or heritage breeds. We're regenerative. I like conservation. We do a bunch of silvopasture, so I'll click those. And then they even want me to share our commodity type, which is cattle, pigs, and I don't know, forest products. I'm curious what those grants look like. This is helping them weed out specific eligibility. So we're a woman-owned business, farmer-owned, and beginning farmers. And then you can say your markets, and then actually we do all of those. Blah, blah, blah. And then you can share more, specifics to say we would really, want more information on this, and you agree to it. And then you can I'll do this I have to change the email for my own farm. But anyway, this is really helpful. I got a grant alert in my inbox this morning that was a very specific grant all about projects that are specific to ending factory farming and helping communities that are impacted by factory farms. That's not really where Rural Action has expertise, so I didn't look into that grant, but I was glad I saw that. I would not have seen that grant otherwise. So do recommend that as a way to find grants.
That's a new one for me, Molly. That's really cool.
It's nice. Yeah.
Same, that's awesome.
Also, check your local library to see if they have the foundation directory online available, because you can access it there through the library.
So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a good evening. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks so much, Molly.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.